The audit risk model consists of three components: inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. Within each of these risk factors, there's a number of sub-factors that would be considered. For example, when we look at inherent risk, it is both the client traits and audit demands that determine the auditor's assessment of inherent risk. So when we're looking at the client traits, we consider what industry they're in. Are there a lot of related parties? Are the underlying accounting issues complex? So for example, in a high-tech industry, there would be more risk than in a durables industry where there's not as much transition and new technology raising issues. When it comes to the complexity issue, a company that has a lot of leases or derivatives, it's possible to make errors in those areas regardless of the confidence, as opposed to a company in the retail sector, which has relatively straightforward transactions. Now, from an auditor's perspective, when we have repeat client engagements, it's simply lower risk. We know a lot more about the client. We know where to audit, we know what areas are of concern, and we can start from a different perspective. If we have unresolved audit issues from the prior year, if it was a contentious audit, that's going to impact our assessment of inherent risk. If we see a lot of the areas in the client require judgment, estimates is another way to describe that, highly subjective decisions, then we're going to assess higher inherent risk. Areas that require industry expertise are also going to have us assess inherent risk higher, because we're going to need to bring in specialists, and that makes it a higher risk engagement. Likewise, with control risk, we're going to look at two possible ways the controls could fail. They could fail to detect or fail to prevent. So failing to detect is we're going to be how good is the monitoring function? How effective is the internal auditor? Both of those would suggest higher inherent risk. Failing to prevent relates more to lack of segregation of duties and ineffective governance. In other words, does the underlying system allow the problems to occur? Detection risk is a little bit more complicated because it's completely within the auditor's control, somewhat. If the auditor does sampling, then there's always a chance we get an unrepresentative sample because we're not looking at everything. That we can control that to the extent we could draw larger and larger samples. And if we do statistical sampling, we can quantify it. But it's impossible if you sample to have no sampling risk. Non-sampling risk comes from three possibilities during the audit: that we unknowingly conduct the wrong procedures. So we just pick the wrong procedure and it's not effective. We apply the right procedure, but we don't do it effectively. Or the third possibility, we are effectively applying the right procedure, but we misinterpret the results. In essence, another way to frame that is the only way an audit procedure is effective is if you pick the right procedure, you apply it correctly, and you interpret the results correctly. If any one of those three fail, then you're going to have an audit failure or a failure to detect. And so these are the sources of detection risk. You need to be able to identify all the sources within the audit model.